Well, hey, church family, it's so good to be with you again. Just love these opportunities that we have to stay connected, both with one another, but also in the context of the season, staying connected to the Word of God and what we sense and feel that God is speaking to our church family in the midst of the season. So we're going to be staying in the series that we started about a month ago, Inside Out series, where we are journeying through the Gospel of Matthew together, and specifically taking some time and a grouping of passages that is often referred to as the Sermon on the Mount. And it's just, again, as we talked about in the previous weeks, it's a re-upping, a re-envisioning of what Jesus talks about is life in his kingdom. It's realizing that we have been invited into living with Christ in the midst of his kingdom. And his kingdom is unlike any other kingdom we have ever experienced. And so what this passage is, and what the Sermon on the Mount introduces us all to, it's introducing us to a new way of living, what it means and what it looks like to live life from his kingdom. And you know, we talked specifically last week, and we're going to use much of what we talked about last week to be the foundation that we build upon in these weeks to come. We talked about how this new way of living really is, in so many ways, it's an inside out way of living. And you know, Jesus, he gives this brash statement at the end of Matthew chapter 5 and verse 20, where he says this, I tell you, unless your righteousness, speaking to the disciples of Jesus, meaning he's speaking to you and me, unless our righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, then you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And as we talked about last week, the one just overarching, clear perspective that Jesus had over and over again throughout the Gospels, speaking to the righteousness of the Pharisees and the scribes, is that he did not want the definition of righteousness that they gave to be the definition of righteousness that you and I live from when living in his kingdom. You see, the Pharisees and the scribes, their righteousness was defined much more as an outside-in righteousness. We looked at this passage last week in Matthew 23, where Jesus is he's rebuking the Pharisees and the scribes for their poor definition of righteousness. And we read this in verse 25. He says, you hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they're full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and the plate, that the outside may also be clean. You see, Jesus wants righteousness to be defined as inside out. That we're not a people that are just given to focusing on making the outside, the external, our appearance look good and look right, but actually that we would spend time on the inside and ensuring that which not everyone can see, but only you are aware of, the places in your life where you are behind closed doors and no one else is watching. See, Jesus wants the definition of righteousness to be the same there as it is everywhere. Jesus wants our righteousness to exceed that of the Pharisees and the scribes, in the sense that it wouldn't be an outside-in righteousness, but it would be an inside-out. You see, the kingdom of heaven is a kingdom that's actually supposed to invade every space, both in us and outside of us. And what I believe, it's just the word for us in this season, is that we would allow his kingdom to have room in us, that it might flow out of us. I believe this is an inside out season for us, church family. And so what we're doing right now and going through the Sermon on the Mount is we're just going to be going through the teachings that Jesus gave, because over the next 6 weeks, we're going to find is actually Jesus addresses so many internal issues, so many real life like things that we deal with in the day to day. And he speaks to them in a place of like looking actually inside us and not just at the external behavior modifications, that we would actually address the root issues of our hearts. So that we might live out of the right definition of righteousness, and we might experience the fullness of his kingdom. So today, we're just going to be reading out of Matthew chapter 5, verse 21, going through verse 26 together. And we're going to be talking about the issue of anger. Verse 21, this is Jesus teaching to his disciples. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. So if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First, be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. Truly, I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. You know, here at the beginning of this passage, Jesus does something that he's going to do in all 6 of these next weeks, as we are going to be looking at issues like anger today. We're going to look at lust, the issues of anxiety. We're going to look at the issue of divorce and our word, actually being our word and keeping oaths and promises, and all of these things. What he's doing is he's starting by addressing an exterior issue, something that's way out there on the external, something that's on the outside that most of us can probably say, yeah, we don't do that. And that's where he starts here by talking about murder. You know, I'm just guessing most of you watching this and listening to me speak, I can personally say myself, I haven't murdered anyone. And most of us can raise our hand on that and be like, yeah, we haven't murdered anyone. And what Jesus is saying is, may that not be your measurement of righteousness. May that not be your measurement of righteousness, because actually murder is just an external, it's a fruit that comes off of a tree that has a root that actually, if we all take awareness of our own lives, we probably have that root somewhere in our heart right now. And what Jesus is pointing to, and what he loves to point to over and over again, is that his kingdom, the goodness of his kingdom, what he came to actually accomplish and do both in and through our lives, is to get to those root issues inside of us so that we don't ever have to deal with those fruits that actually can come out of us. And so what Jesus says is he really brings a clarity to the truth and the reality that murder and anger, they are in the same conversation, because anger is the root that produces the fruit of murder. And Jesus gives us a very clear direction on how we should take assessment in our own heart and our own lives, that we don't need to just be those who celebrate that we don't have murder going on in and through our life, but actually we should be those who celebrate when we exterminate and actually root out and get out those roots of anger, because that is what his kingdom is all about. This is what he says. He says in the aftermath of communicating, you have heard that it was said, you shall not murder. Whoever murders will be liable to judgment. Jesus says, he says that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. So not just the one who murders, but actually everyone who is angry, who allows anger to remain inflamed, to stay, to reside in your heart. Everyone who allows anger to stick around will be liable to judgment. And then whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. And whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire. See what Jesus is saying here is saying, very simply, he's saying, anyone who lets anger stay, anyone who knows the root is there and it's inside of your heart and you're okay with it, you let it stick around, you let it take residence, you allow it to just fester for a while, you're liable to judgment just the same as someone who murders. And then you who allow that anger to fester, and maybe in just a moment of heat and a moment of frustration, you allow that anger to actually produce a fruit of insult, of calling a brother out and downgrading them, whether you are calling them a name or declaring over them, you're good for nothing. You're allowing that anger to overflow into your reality. What Jesus says is not only you're liable to judgment, you're liable to counsel. And he goes to the extreme of saying you're liable to the hell of fire. And I know that even upon hearing it, it's a little jolting. It's like, whoa, Jesus, simmer down. Like that's going from talking about murder to just calling a friend a name. And we're talking about a liability being an eternal significance of actually producing the fire, the remnants of hell. Well, I think it is important to note that actually many scholars looking at this passage really take note at the fact that what Jesus is saying here is it's present tense. It's not just speaking future tense. It's not just saying this is what is going to happen later on in your life, is that, if you call your brother names, you call him a fool, then you're going to hell. But actually what Jesus is saying here is he's saying that if you allow anger to reside in your heart, to remain in your heart, and there's an overflow of that anger and it spills over into your relationships, the people around you, into the lives of people around you, ultimately what you are producing hell on earth. You're producing the remnants, the actuality of what hell actually is here on earth. And it's going to burn. It's going to burn you. It's going to burn your relationships. It's going to burn your friends. It's going to burn your interactions. It's going to produce hell. And that's why Jesus is saying to his disciples, man, don't just let righteousness end with murder. Man, let it get to the root. Allow these things to actually mean something, that you actually tend to, that you take time to address, that you take time to ask the question, man, is there anyone in your life right now that you have carried frustration towards, you have carried an anger towards, and you have not addressed it, you have not taken the initiative, you have not openly had conversations, you have not prayed about it, you have not gone to them, you have not brought other people into that reality in your own life. If that's you, Jesus is saying, tend to it. Tend to it, because if you let that root remain, it is not going to produce life. You are not going to experience the fullness of his kingdom. You're not going to experience the life that he intended for you to live from. And so if you hear nothing else this morning, May that just be the word for us, that we would be quick to respond to what Jesus is saying and actually, taking note of the places in our life where we've let anger reside. And maybe we've even allowed it to overflow and affect our relationships. It's time to tend to those places, church. It's time to tend to them, to uproot anger, to get it out, and then to celebrate the reality of his kingdom righteousness. Well, Jesus goes on and he gives us two really simple, practical applications that I think we all can glean from in the remainder of this passage. So let's look at that together. Here in verse 23, Jesus says, "So if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. For truly I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny." You know, what Jesus does here is he shows us two stories, two examples of anger. And the first of which is talking about an individual who's going to the altar to give a gift of worship to God. And he says, if you're nearly there, if you're right at the altar and you remember, oh wait, I have a frustration with a brother. I've had a disagreement and there's still anger that needs to be dealt with. Jesus says what you need to do, what tending to it looks like. It looks like running. Go to your brother. Go and address it. Do everything in your power to actually uproot any roots of anger in your life and deal with it before you come before an altar to worship him. Which I think for us, let's take two notes. One is back in the day, when Jesus is giving this teaching, the altar that's being spoke of, it's the altar in Jerusalem. There was one altar where the gifts of worship were given, and people would come from all different cities, locations, regions to this altar to give their gift, their offering gift to the Lord, which would mean that to go from these cities and villages to Jerusalem, like where this teaching is actually happening in the moment is Galilee, which is right around 80 miles from Jerusalem. It's a long track to actually get to where the altar is. And so if that just can give you a right picture, what Jesus is saying is go to the extreme. Go to the extremes. If you've walked 80 miles to come to the altar, to give a gift of worship, and before you give the gift, you realize, wait, there's undealt with anger in my heart, then you do whatever it takes. It might mean you need to run that 80 miles back home, deal with it, and then come back to the altar. But do whatever it takes. Go to the extremes to get this out of your life, because in the end, I believe what Jesus is saying is it matters. It matters so deeply. And, church, I have this sense that, we're talking about anger. And in this day, in this hour, in this place, like anger is so real and it's so easy to come under the influence of. But I believe what Christ would call us all to is that we would be diligent in this. And we would actually take note that he's saying you do whatever it takes to uproot anger out of your heart and out of your life. And I just believe it's like a father who right? If I'll just even speak for myself. I'm a father. And if one of my children ingested poison, they ingested something in our home that had something toxic within it, I can promise you this, my response would not be just to be like, let's give it a little time. Let's see what happens here. No. If he ingested or she ingested something that is toxic and poisonous, I am going to do everything in my power. And I'm going to go to whatever extreme I need to go to get that out of my child, because I don't want them to experience the fruit and the result of allowing poison to infiltrate the entirety of their system. I just believe that's what God's saying, is that anger, the root of anger, it's poison. It's poison, church. You gotta get it out at all costs, at all extremity. Get it out. So I pray that today you take a moment and you, as David says, you just allow the Spirit of God to search your heart, to know the ways of your heart, and any place where anger, where frustration has been given a place to reside, that you would get it out. Secondly, we see this story about two individuals who there's a disagreement going on that ultimately is leading to one person suing the other, and being an accuser and the one who's accused. And what Jesus says in the teaching is that that you would deal with the matter outside of the court. In this day and age, that it was a pretty common occurrence that there would be issues that arose between two individuals, and one would sue the other, and that would end up them both appearing before a council, and ultimately you're at the council's hand. Whatever they decide, that is the final decision. And what Jesus is saying here, he's saying, would you be someone who's so quick to deal with the matter? Don't let it remain. Don't let it just, as we talked about, of going to whatever extreme. Would you go to whatever extreme, but would you do it quickly? There's another passage in the Bible that says, don't let the sun go down on your anger. Like, whatever it takes, just do it quickly. Don't let a day go by where you allow anger to remain in your heart or in your life. And so would those be just practical applications for all of us this week, as we actually address what Jesus is talking about here in the root of anger? Would we be so extreme in dealing with this? Would we do everything we possibly can to uproot this out of our life? And would we be so quick to do it, to not allow it to be something that just, I'll get to it when it's right. I'll get to it when I can get to it. But would we be so quick if there's frustrations that come up? And let's be very real. Let's be very honest with ourselves, right? That most of the time this is going to have to do with relationships that are close to us. It's going to have to do with relationships with friends, with brothers, sisters, family members, with those that we do life with, because most often that's where the anger and the frustration can arise the most. And so may this be a week where we practice what Jesus is teaching here, and being quick and being extreme in dealing with frustrations and angers in our life. And, if you make a mistake and you call someone a name, acknowledge it, apologize, be quick to ask for forgiveness, be quick to tend to that frustration and the overflow of that frustration. I just believe it, church. I believe that as we simply put these practical truths into practice into our life, we are going to experience more and more of the kingdom of heaven, both in us and around us. And I believe we are going to see his kingdom come so powerfully in these days. I love you, church. Praying for you. Be blessed.